He says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of harvest, or the Lord of hosts, excuse me. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned. You have murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you." So once again today we have a very positive and uplifting message for ourselves, as I shall try to press home to you very diligently and urgently, lest you think I'm not rich, so this doesn't apply to me. Okay? Because there is something for each one of us here. First of all, though, we do need to go back to chapter 4, verse 17. We finished up last week with this section about making plans for tomorrow. Today or tomorrow we'll go into such and such a town, spend a year there, trade, and make a profit. And we said there are two problems with that James asserts. The first is that it does not recognize the transitoriness of life, that you're here today, gone tomorrow. You're like a mist, a vapor that vanishes. And it does not recognize the sovereignty of God over circumstances and over plans, over life. There is here, somebody, I don't remember who it was, brought up the question of, is there a condemnation here just about this attitude of going and making a profit? And I said, no, I don't think James argues against profit, but in the context of the entire book, it is very clear, especially about what we're about to read, that even in making a profit, there is definitely danger. Okay? There is danger because the rich, as Paul would say, they fall into many temptations and snares. Okay? It is very difficult for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. And so James definitely does have concerns about the rich there, but I think the primary thing is not necessarily their love of riches here, but the way they are approaching life, the attitude with regard to who they are and with regard to who God is. And so he says, because of that, when you boast about your plans, when you place confidence in the plans that you make, that kind of boasting is evil. It's self-centered, it's earthbound, fleshly, and dare we say even demonic, because it's certainly not, heavenly minded, God-centered, when you do not keep him in the picture. And then he finishes by saying, so, okay, that so means as a conclusion of this argument, as the outcome of this argument, we know that whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. Seems kind of disjointed, doesn't it? What does this conclusive statement have to do with what he's just said about traveling and making a profit and not taking into account the transitoriness of life and the eternal sovereignty of God?
I think there's an element of it up in the first two verses here in 13 and 14 where it says, "Come now, you say you're going to do this, yet you don't know what tomorrow brings." We've set our plan, and then it goes on talking about the arrogance of boasting. We're going to set that aside for a second. But we've got plans for tomorrow, right? I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. And if that happens tomorrow and God puts something in front of me, right, and instead I hold to my plans that may not have been bad to start with, I've selected what was good at the cost of what was best or right. Mm-hmm. And I've not accepted that God is the one in charge of my life. He's going to set what's in front of me. And as He puts those things in front of us, we need to be willing and open to do it. Similar things we see in Acts, right? Because the apostles are moved all over the place, despite their plans, based off of what God has put in them that they needed to go and do those. Hold to those plans instead of following it, we're falling into sin because we're following our own arrogance instead of the sovereignty of God.
Right. So, in essence, the person who knows the right thing to do chooses not to do that right thing because the plans that he's made for today or tomorrow take priority over that right thing. Okay? So that is one possibility. Anything else?
I mean, can it be in terms of just anything? As far as if we know what something is sinful and we do it, I mean, can you make that generalization, or is it really tied to what you talked about?
I'm trying to make this a logical connection between that statement and what he's just said, because he makes that connection by saying so. You know, this is the logical conclusion of what I've just said. You know, that you need to, and maybe I'll give it away here, you've got the wrong attitude about your life and about your plans and about your business and about what's going on around you. You've got the wrong attitude. And that's evil. So, okay. So the second thing that I would suggest is that doing the right thing sometimes does not entail action, and that's dangerous to say in James, because I mean James is very much about, you know, not just faith but works, not just hearing but doing. Okay, there has to be action. Okay, right belief and right attitude and right hearing have to precipitate right behavior. Okay, but behind that right behavior is what? Right attitude, right belief, right action. Okay, so I see here both aspects in what James is doing here, because he's not confronting here the doing so much as the attitude behind the doing. Okay, this boasting that you're doing, this confidence that you're placing in your own plans, it's evil, it's sin, because you don't account for yourself as a mist and God as sovereign and eternal. Okay, so I think both of them go there. So we need to be attentive both to right behavior and right belief. And for us, I think belief is much easier than behavior, typically. But there are cases in our lives where we think we may even think we've got the behavior figured out, and we don't even consider the right belief and the motives behind, you know, what we're doing. Why are we doing what we're doing? Okay. What are the beliefs that are driving us to do what we do? Okay. So let me press this a little bit by trying to be somewhat specific on this verse. We might be able to do. Well, I'm going to back up, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, so you've probably heard these phrases. That there are two types of sin. That there is a sin of, I think there's two M's in that, right? Okay, what is the sin of commission?
Ones that you commit.
Okay, so it's a sin that you commit. Examples?
Two.
Just checking to see if you're paying attention. You know what? I'm just doing it in Hebrew. There's a dagesh in there, so that's a two M's. That's two double. It's a double mu. Okay.
What was your question?
Give me an example.
So that's a sin of omission. You left the M out.
No, it's a dagesh right there. It's a dagesh. It doubles the letter. It's Hebrew.
Find it on the Scrabble board. It's double letter.
Just take your marker. No, anyway. What's an example of a sin of commission?
Murder.
Murder, yeah, okay. What's one that James identifies besides murder? Slander. Do not speak evil. Okay. How about something else that James identifies?
Partiality.
Partiality. Okay, very good. All right, so those are just a few of the ones that he identifies. Now, we also have what we call the sin of... See how I did that? That's okay. All right. I can see you guys are getting confused and can't possibly be my fault. Okay, what's a sin of omission? Is it a sin that you omit?
Don't do the good.
No, right, okay, yeah. So it's something that has to do with omit, but so if this is a sin that you, a sin that you commit, this is not a sin that you omit, okay? So the sin of omission is not omitting murder, right?
Not taking care of orphans.
Okay, so if murder is a sin, what is the virtue that we might put opposite? Okay, love your neighbor. Okay, what about slander? What's a positive thing?
Peace.
Encourage. There's an A, G. I am really having problems today. So, let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only that which is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to the hearer. Okay? So, encouragement, positive words. What about partiality?
Being just.
Justice, righteousness, or we could also say love could apply there as well. Equanimity, whatever word you want to do. Okay, so you know that your words ought to be used to encourage others. Okay, so let's get more specific. There's an example that James gives earlier in the book that's pretty specific of a good that they are not doing.
Taking care of the widow and orphan.
Okay, there you go. Care for widow, not windows, but widows. I mean, windows need to be taken care of occasionally too, especially if you got little kids and dogs. What's another one that James talks about, a specific example he gives? Be warmed and well fed. Okay? Providing I don't know, meeting needs, providing for life. Let's just say that. Oh my goodness. See, it's not my fault the words are misspelled. The marker is rebellious. Okay, providing for life. If you have the things necessary for life, okay, that's what, I don't remember, is it James or John says it that way? I think it's James. If you have the things that, what? Providing for life. That doesn't look like life? All right.
It looks like afterlife.
Providing for the afterlife. Make sure you do that before, anyway. Meet. Does someone want to be the secretary? This is another one that's not going to go on YouTube. The battery's dead or something. Anyway. Okay, so these are a little bit easier to do. So if you find yourself in the situation that James describes, okay, if you come back to, no, where was it? Chapter... Where's it at? 2:16? Why am I not seeing that? There it is. Okay, so 15. If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warmed and filled," without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. So, you see a brother who is poorly clothed, he doesn't have a meal to eat, you have the means to provide for him, and you don't do it. Okay? That's a sin of omission. That's a sin of omission. Okay? So first of all, I want to be very careful to make sure that you understand that this does not mean God expects me to read my Bible, and if I don't read my Bible, I'm sinning. God expects me to pay my tithe, and if I don't pay my tithe, I'm sinning. God expects me to go to Sunday school, and if I don't go to Sunday school, that means I'm sinning. Okay? That's not what it means. Now, it may encompass those things, but this is not about, again, that checklist of religious duties that you have to do to be a good Christian. In James, when he is talking about knowing the right thing to do, it almost invariably refers to how you love your neighbor. And how you love your neighbor always issues in action and not just words. Be warmed and filled. So, what this means for us today, this is absolutely still applicable for us today. It may look a little bit different because we don't always have people around us who need to be warmed and filled. Okay, they've got government subsidies and things like that. But sometimes we do. And how many times is it our tendency to say, "I don't have time. Someone else will do that. I'm kind of broke," or "I got to pay this bill. Someone else will do that." Wait a minute. Do you have that right now? Don't worry about tomorrow. Come now, you who say, "Today or tomorrow, I have a bill to pay." And God puts someone in front of you today, and He says, "Love this person." You say, "Well, I can't. I can't. I got a bill to pay tomorrow, next week." No, you have someone to love today, right now. What do? And you say, "Well, surely that's not sin. I mean, somebody's going to love them. I mean, I don't have this rule, you know." No, that's what James is saying. He's told you to love your neighbor, and to love your neighbor in physical, tangible ways. And God has put someone in front of you to love, and instead you have chosen tomorrow. Do you see the problem? Now, this goes so far as one commentator argued that this goes beyond the sin of omission, because the problem with this is that when we can identify something specifically and put our finger on it, we tend to make lists and then limit things. Okay? That today I was not presented with someone who was homeless and hungry, and so I didn't need to do anything today. Okay. This commentator, and I tend to agree with him, suggested that what James is after here is not we need to be the kind of people to do specific instances of things, but that we need to be the kind of people who every day are doing good. We need to be doers of good, and we know that we are to be doing good. And if we are not doing good every day, for us it is sin. Does that distinction, does the difference I'm making there make sense to you? That it's not just, I know in this specific instance I'm supposed to do this thing, and if I never have that revelation today that I'm supposed to be doing this thing, then I haven't sinned in this way. Right? He suggests that yes, you very well could be, because you're not actively pursuing good. You're not actively doing good. For you, that's sin. What do you think about that?
Sorry, I was just going to say that the parable of the Good Samaritan seems to be like a good fit for this. I mean, as far as the people that passed the man by, they weren't necessarily violating any kind of Jewish law, and they actually thought that they were in the right in passing this person that's basically dying by, but really they were embodying the heart of sins of omission in their actions.
Absolutely.
In their heart.
Yep. Exactly.
I think that James also starts with this at the beginning, right, and he builds all throughout it, and he says, you need to be doers of the word and not hearers only. And all throughout this, he gives examples of calling us out where we just hear it and kind of ignore it and do our own thing. But here he's kind of putting that whole concept in our face again and saying, you need to do it. You need to fulfill the royal law, and you need to love your neighbor as yourself, and you need to be seeking those opportunities to do it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're obvious, and God puts them in front of you, and you wrestle with it, and you make a bad choice, and you decide not to do it. Sometimes they're not so obvious, and you're not looking for them, and you just miss it, and then the next day you realize, wow, I really missed that one. Mm-hmm. And when you identify those, I think that in the way that he's calling this out as sin here, he's also calling it out as something that needs confession and needs to be addressed. Mm-hmm. Even if it's 3 days too late to fix it, mm-hmm. you still need to bring it up and get it right. Right.
I think this is very much, it's a very difficult thing to do because it requires us very much to be focused and intentional about serving others, putting ourselves in the service of others for the sake of loving them. Which is basically what Jesus means, I think, and the law means when it says love your neighbor as yourself.
In regards to what he says, he's talking about brethren, and then like what Paul says about the Samaritan, is there a hierarchy between whether or not you're a Christian brother in doing this, or if it's just anybody on the planet?
I think that there is, I don't want to use the word hierarchy really, but I think that there is a priority. I don't think that you can make the argument that you should exclude love for those outside the community. But it is, Paul clearly says, love everyone, especially those of the brotherhood. Is it Peter? That you should love intensely those with whom you are in community. But you are to be a person who loves others regardless. Love your enemies, right?
That's the thing. It's going to be hard to love people that are outside the church if we can't love people that are in the church. Because those are the people we interact with.
Right.
More common than people outside.
Right. So, Walmart. Okay. My wife brought that up earlier and really threw me off, but yeah, I was planning on talking about this. So I've been thinking about this a lot this week. If this is what James is saying, that not just specific instances of knowing that I'm supposed to do something and then just willingly and saying, no, I'm not going to do that, okay, which definitely would be a problem. But if it goes deeper than that to say, if I am not a person who is actively doing good daily, for me it's sin, then that really demands some serious examination of my life. And so, I don't remember what day it was, Thursday, maybe. Thursday. I had been thinking about this pretty much all morning, and then I went to lunch with the pastor, and just a very encouraging conversation. And it just had me ruminating a little bit more on what it means to do good. And I stopped by Walmart on the way home, and on the way in, there was a young lady sitting on the curb with a cardboard sign said, "Stranded, anything will help." And just kind of, I don't typically, help just anybody, begging for money or whatever. The police say don't do that, and I wouldn't give people money. I might buy them a meal, if I were going to do something like that. But it kept with me, and I didn't do anything. Because I thought, well, it's not something I would normally do, and it wouldn't be appropriate. So I actually went home, and I shared with Bethany. It was just a weird situation because, number one, would I have noticed this person if it wasn't a pretty middle 20-year-old, mid-20s girl? I mean, that's the first thing. Would I have even noticed? I don't know. Would it have been appropriate for me to approach her and offer help as a married man and a young girl? I mean, and then there's just the whole awkwardness of the situation, because this was not a person who looked homeless, and it was not a person who looked like a drug abuser. I mean, she was an attractive mid-20s, blonde hair, looked nicely kept, sitting in front of, on the curb by the street in front of Walmart. And so I said, do we need to go back up there? I said, maybe I wouldn't go by myself, but Bethany could come with me and we could check it out. And we just had a conversation like, what if it's a trap? What if it's, she's escaping sex trafficking? What if she's, and we didn't know. We just ended up not doing anything. And I don't want to go out and say that I sinned in not doing anything there, but it was just a real picture for me of how difficult it can be sometimes to say, what is the right thing to do here? And so I don't mean to just tie you down, and I don't think James means to tie you down and just get you all wrapped up in knots because you never know exactly what you're supposed to do. Okay? I think at times that it will be very clear that there's a decisive step you need to take. But I think the more important thing is that we need to be the kind of people who are ready to do good and who are actively in some way doing good. Okay? So I would challenge you, if you cannot think of in your life some way that you are actively loving another person, sacrificing of yourself for the sake of others, that you take some time to examine yourself and pray through this and find out, what can I be doing? What would the Lord have you be doing to love people, to do good in the name of love? Okay. We do need to move on, so any questions or final comments about that? Do I need to say anything else about the Walmart girl? It was just so weird.
Brunettes, it's a different story.
No, and it wasn't,
I think we've all kind of experienced that situation, as far as maybe not exactly, but similar, where you're confronted with something that, it's like, what am I supposed to do here? Do I, is this legit or is it not legit?
Or is it dangerous or is it appropriate?
Right.
And it just threw me for a loop too, because it's like she does not look like the type of person that would be, and that's pretty judgmental on my part, what type of person, but she did not look homeless, unkempt, it was weird.
But I
anyway.
had told him, a couple days earlier, I had seen a post on Facebook of somebody reaching out. Their sister's friend was here to have a baby. She was due any day. She thought she'd be able to stay at Ronald McDonald House, and they wouldn't let her stay there for some reason. Does anybody know a place where she could stay? And in that moment, I'm thinking maybe we should, maybe I should get in contact and offer our home. And then, you just you're like, oh, I'm busy, and maybe she's looking for an organization, or you just make excuses. I feel like I make excuses because I'm busy or whatever. So when he brought that, I was like, oh, maybe I do need to go back to this post and see about this girl. And, you know, I mean, it happens all the time, I think, and we just...
Yeah, we just scroll by the people's hurts and, you know, opportunities all over the place where we can be working in people's lives.
One thing I think about along those lines is if you tried to keep track of every person in your sphere, it's just such an overwhelming amount of people. Whereas I tend to think that, you know, if you could concentrate on the church community, the local church community that you're in, and sure, there's people out and about, but how much easier would it be to seek out those that you may or may not know well in the church, it's a large church, but how much easier would it be to do those things inside this community? And it might, you know, you might be looking to focus on this one thing, and you may avoid all these other thousands of people that may need it more, but it's just so difficult because of the quantity of people and the needs and stuff out there. That
Right.
Making the discernment is just difficult. Yeah, I've had people show up in like my brother-in-law's church. This guy shows up and he had this story that everybody was just buying, and they gave him the shirt off their back. One guy even gave him a job or offered him a job. Then I got back to Kansas and noticed that there was a story about this guy making his way from church to church, collecting money from people.
Yep.
You know, stuff like that. So it's just difficult to discern that. But
Yeah, but then it goes back to like, should it be our first thought that, well, I'm going to be reserved because I don't want to be taken advantage of, or I don't want to be hurt, or, you know, it's hard.
Yeah, we thought about that too with regard to this young lady. You know, maybe she's just out there begging for money because it's more than minimum wage. You know, I've read newspaper stories about that, or not. I don't read the newspaper, but internet articles, whatever. And it just reminded me, Oswald Chambers, and there's a couple others I've read who basically they'd give, you know, money and people would reproach them. Oh, don't you know they're just going to go spend that on booze? And his reply was, God has called me to give. They will answer to the judge for their behavior and what they do with that. But God has called me to give. You know? I don't know that I would go as far as that. I mean, because like I said, I still want to exercise wisdom as well. Are you hungry? Let me buy you a Big Mac, you know, rather than just giving them $20 to go, you know, buy booze. But regardless, whose responsibility is that person? I mean, who's responsible for that person's decisions? That person. But who's responsible to love that person? I am. Okay, and that is generally going to mean those people in your immediate circle. We often think of loving people like this as strangers that we come across who have needs. And we forget that we've got dozens of people right in front of our faces at church and at work and at home every day that have needs. And they may not be physical, financial, material needs. You know? They may be in need of a skill that you possess, maybe in need of your time and your attention, or a conversation, or or a connection. They may be in need of anything that you might be able to possess, and we just don't see it because we're busy with ourselves. And it's only those jarring situations that pull us out of it and say, okay, maybe I can do something here. Okay, and so we need to be people who know the right thing to do, good, and be doing it actively. Okay.
I'm going to contribute this piece out of context, but and even though it's talking about something else, I think that it applies in general here as well. You know, from John 21, the disciples are having a discussion, and one of them turns to Jesus and asks him about this man, and Jesus says, if it's my will that he remains until I come,
what is that to you?
You follow me. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what's being called out here is that we are given direction for what we need to do in our lives. And we are very, very good at seeing how other people are not doing what we think they should do
Oh, yeah.
in their lives.
Who are you to judge your brother?
And I think there's an element of that exists here as well. And not to dispute any of the good conversation that we've already had on this topic, but sometimes we can also get into a point to where we are rationalizing ourselves out of following Christ based off of what we think somebody else isn't going to do. And that's kind of silly if you think about it. If I'm helping somebody that maybe isn't a brother and doesn't follow Christ, why should I rationalize myself out of following Christ because somebody who doesn't follow Christ isn't going to follow Christ? That's kind of a pretty big fallacy, and we're pretty good at it.
Yeah.
So just more to think about, that doing good, we're given the commandment to follow Christ. Even if it's like Paul says, I'm poured out as a drink offering on your behalf. There is an element and an opportunity for heavenly wisdom, but we're not usually very good at telling the difference between earthly wisdom and heavenly wisdom.
I've kind of developed some discernment just from the times that I've failed at that. Like I felt a little nudge to give them food or give them something, and
Or help fix some plumbing.
or whatever, and I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And then I've reflected on the times that I have obeyed and the blessing that came from it. And I can count, like there was one time I was driving on my way to my parents' house. Hour trip, I was late already. My plan, going. I see this woman walking along Texas Oliver Golf Course, right along the road. The whole thought in my head was just like, she's getting ready to kill herself. It was just this wham. It seemed heavenly, just like, help her, stop. I kept going. I dread it every day. Well, not every day, but every time I think about it, it's just this. And so I've learned to recognize that voice. And like whenever I was in San Antonio, we were at a Walmart, rough neighborhood. I just sat down waiting on my coworker. This homeless guy sits right there. And that voice again, give him food. I just looked at him and said, you want food, don't you? I didn't know what else to say. He said, I don't like being asking and being insistent and all, but yeah, I like, what do you want? He told me a loaf of bread, ham, mustard, cheese. It's like, I can do that. You want a Coke? You want? I bought him, it was like $15. It's like, that's nothing.
Yep.
So, just learning to discern that, even if you fail, learn from it.
Yeah.
Learn to recognize that voice.
Yeah.
Because every homeless guy you pass, you don't have the money to give him a house,
Right.
but learn that voice.
Right. I mean, and this is not a situation where I'm saying we need to be 100%. We need to be 100% now. I mean, the life in accordance with the covenant is a process. It is a place of growing obedience because it's a place of growing conformity, a growing sanctification, where the Spirit conforms us to the image of Christ. All right, so we've spent 30 minutes or so on one verse, and I said I'm going to get this done in 3 weeks, so we actually need to do today's lesson in the next 10 minutes. Is that a challenge? All right, so another fun part here. Come now, you rich. So this come now, we saw this just in verse 13 of the previous chapter. Come now, you who say. This is it's an invitation to dialogue. We see a similar expression in the prophets, where the Lord invites people to come and present their case before Him. So here James is pretty much saying, all right, let's have this kind of official dialogue. Let's hear your case, and let me present the evidence. Okay. So come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Now, I want to suggest something here, that up until this point, I think when he's been talking about the rich, he's including both the believing rich and the non-believing rich. I think that there is, we talked about this in chapter 1, where he says, let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation and the rich in his humiliation, for like a flower of grass he will pass away. So the rich man will fade away in the midst of his pursuits, his plans. We should have tied that to you who plan for tomorrow, right? I think that refers to the believing rich as well as the poor rich. We saw the rich in the midst of their assembly in chapter 2. Okay? Here, I think this has to do probably more with, although it can encompass the believing rich, but I have a hunch that this is kind of I'm not sure what the official word is, an apostrophe maybe, about the rich as a community that is oppressing the poor. And so what I mean by this, let me explain by way of comparison. A book that we don't often speak of. Turn to the prophet Nahum. Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk. Or Habakkuk, or Habakkuk. Habakkuk? Yes, please. Give you a minute to find it. It's on page 782 in my Bible. Okay. An oracle concerning Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum of Elkosh. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries and keeps wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means clear the guilty. His way is in the whirlwind and storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry. He dries up all the rivers. Bashan and Carmel wither. The bloom of Lebanon withers. The mountains quake before him. The hills melt. The earth heaves before him, the world and all who dwell in it. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can endure the heat of his anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and the rocks are broken into pieces by him. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows those who take refuge in him. But with an overflowing flood, he will make a complete end of the adversaries and will pursue his enemies into the darkness. What do you plot against the Lord? He will make a complete end. Trouble will not rise a second time. For they are like entangled thorns, like drunkards as they drink. They are consumed like stubble, fully dried. From you came one who plotted evil against the Lord, a worthless counselor. Thus says the Lord, though they are at full strength and many, they will be cut down and pass away. Though I have afflicted you, I will afflict you no more. And now I will break his yoke from off you and will burst your bonds asunder. The Lord has given commandment about you. No more shall your name be perpetuated. From the house of your gods I will cut off the carved image and the metal image. I will make your grave, for you are vile. Behold, upon the mountains, the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace. Keep your feasts, O Judah, fulfill your vows, for never again shall the worthless pass through you. He is utterly cut off. Okay. You say, well, where's the parallel there? Okay. A couple of things. I want you to get the whole picture in mind of what kind of God is. But notice this. He uses the pronoun you several times. Sometimes it refers to Israel or Judah, and sometimes it refers to, who does it refer to in verse 9? For you plot against the Lord. Or verse 11, from you came out one who plotted evil against the Lord. Or verse 14, no more shall your name be perpetuated. From the house of your gods I will cut off. You are vile. Okay, who is that referring to? Nineveh. It's referring to Nineveh. It's referring to the leader of Nineveh, okay, the king of Nineveh. 3:17, your princes are like grasshoppers, your scribes like cloud. Okay, so he's addressing these speeches to Nineveh. To whom was Nahum written?
To the Jews?
To the Jews.
I mean, it's,
To Judah. Yes? To Israel. To God's people. Were these words that the king of Nineveh ever heard? We don't know. Maybe. Probably not. Okay? So you see what's going on here? He is addressing an oppressor directly in the second person. You. But he's writing this to them. And they are reading what God pronounces against an oppressor. Okay? I think the similar thing is happening here in James. Okay? Come now, you rich, weep and howl and mourn, or weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Okay? He is pronouncing judgment on those who are oppressing the believers. He is writing here to people who are on the fence about faith and works, but he's also writing to people who are being oppressed, who are feeling that oppression from people within their community, who are playing favoritism, who are making them sit at their feet. So he's taking this a step higher and talking about those rich people who have no room for repentance like he talked about in chapter 4, but those people who are weightily under the wrath and the condemnation of God. And so this is a technique that the prophets often use, and James, I think, is picking up here, that he condemns the oppressor to the oppressed, to give encouragement to the oppressed, but also, if the oppressor hears, instill fear in their heart of the coming judgment. And so here he says, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Those miseries are attended, they come with the impending judgment of God, the doom, the day of slaughter that he refers to. He says, your gold and silver have corroded. He says, your riches have rotted, your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and silver have corroded or rusted. James knows gold and silver don't rust. This is an exaggeration for effect. Even your most precious metals will rust. And if they will rust, what will happen to you? Okay, this should jar your memory too. What does Jesus say about don't store up your treasures here where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal? Okay, so this is the doom of those who do place their treasures here. Okay, all of that is going to corrode. It's going to rust. It's going to vanish away. But even worse than that, your gold and your silver, they've corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. Their corrosion will eat your flesh, will corrode your flesh, will rust your flesh. This is judgment fire language. I mean, this is also why I wanted to read Nahum, to get that picture of the God who judges his enemies, who comes with burning fire against the oppressor, who will not leave the oppressor uncondemned. This is fierce language for those who stand in opposition to God because they oppress his people. He says, you have laid up your treasure in the last days, the days when the judgment of God is about to be revealed. Look down in verse 5. He says, you have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. These are the people who they enjoy the riches, therefore they enjoy the niceties that come with riches. They enjoy houses, they enjoy fine furniture and clothing, they enjoy meals that fill their bellies. Unless you think that this does not apply to you, it does. Okay? Compared to most of the world, you own a house or live in a house or an apartment. You don't miss many meals. Your clothing is not falling apart. You have a vehicle or transportation. You are rich in comparison. And so he's saying, look, you're living in this luxury, this self-indulgence, and then hear this kind of double-edged phrase here. He says, you have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. Now, this fatten your hearts could mean two things in a day of slaughter. Number one, it could mean that you are living like soldiers who have just won victory. You are feasting and banqueting and celebrating your victory because you've just slaughtered your enemy, the righteous person. You've just slaughtered the righteous person, and you're boasting about it and feasting about it. The other option, which I think kind of fits better, is you've fattened yourselves by living in luxury and indulgence and thinking, oh, I'm fat because I'm rich, No, you've fattened yourself like a cow, like a calf that's being led to slaughter. In your rejoicing, there's this irony that you don't even realize that your celebration is a celebration of death, of your own, when judgment falls upon you. And why is this? He says, you've withheld, verse 4, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud. They're crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. This is an explicit law in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy, where they are to give their laborers their wages that day before sunrise. We saw this in Deuteronomy. They depend on that. And these people are withholding those wages and therefore causing the workers to starve. Instead of providing the things needful for the body, they are withholding money that provides the things needful for the body. And therefore, they are oppressing the poor. So, I think this goes hand in hand with knowing what to do and not doing it. It also applies to knowing what not to do and doing it anyway. Okay? It is the opposite of being ready to love and to give and to sacrifice of yourself for the sake of others. I challenge you this week to consider yourselves, to consider your life, to consider the way you live as a person who is relatively rich in this world. And do you choose to withhold something that you owe to others? And by the way, Paul does say, let no debt remain outstanding except that, what debt? To love one another. Will you choose rather to pad your wallet, to pad your, whatever, rather than to give for the sake of loving others? Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about this this withholding and what the result of it is, with the cries of the wages and the cries of the harvester coming to the Lord of the harvest. And then this last phrase, He does not resist you. What does that mean? Who is He? Think about that. We'll talk about that and try to move it on into the idea of suffering, since I think those two things will fit together as well. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace.